Hello, this is Ava from Soul GPS. Welcome to my channel. In today's video, I wanted to talk to you about complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which is what so many of us feel after we come out of an abusive relationship, especially if there has also been a history of being raised in an abusive family. There's a link between that. It goes pretty deep. It is not, in my experience, always the case. Sometimes people come from really positive environments when they were young, but then they end up in relationships that end up damaging their sense of self-esteem and self-worth, and they suffer from a lot of the damage that comes as a result of being constantly exposed to manipulations, abuse, criticisms, sometimes also physical abuse, and so on and so forth. So I wanted to talk to you about this, and especially I wanted to talk to you about this in a context of, should you take antidepressants or anti-anxiety medication if you're struggling with it, and it's especially strong soon after you come out of a relationship like that, because at that point you are faced with the kind of a vacancy that this relationship leaves within you, and that's when usually all the fears come up. We're very afraid, we worry about loneliness. That's very common. I'll never find anybody, nobody's ever gonna love me. And a lot of the times these messages are the messages that were instilled within people, in you, in us, when we were in these relationships, and there was a purpose behind it. The purpose was to make you stay, to make you put up with this for as long as possible. So that's what I want to talk to you about today. I have quite a few notes here, so you may see me glancing over at my screen, because I do not want to miss anything that I have prepared here for you. It's a pretty rich topic. I'm going to also share with you some of my own personal experiences with taking antidepressants. So, but before I get to this, a couple of things. Number one is, if you are new to my channel, if you haven't yet done so, please subscribe, please write us a comment, put on a like. It really helps to spread this information, so I really appreciate your support. We all appreciate your support, because a lot of people, I get messages from them who are saying, I just discovered your channel, I wish I had done so a year ago or earlier, because it's really helping me right now. And the way that the YouTube algorithm works is that unless there's activity on the channel, it doesn't, it doesn't make my videos show up on other people's feeds. So anything I can do in that way is highly, highly appreciated. The other thing I want to mention is I still have some spaces in my American workshops that I'm going to be putting on this June. The European workshops are all sold out. I'm actually going to probably expand the space and have more people join us, because there's such demand for this work. But for New York and San Francisco, I still have some spaces. So if you haven't already done so, you can send me an email asking for the details of this workshop. I'm also going to, below this video, put on a link to a video I made specifically about the workshop, so you can learn about the content, what we're going to be doing and talking about. And it's actually very relevant to this video, because it will be about overcoming C-PTSD, so complex post-traumatic stress disorder, and learning tools to cope with it, to help yourself come out of what I call the dark night of the soul and experience much more relief. And also we gain a lot of wisdom going through this process, by the way. So the amazing thing about going through this and coming out is that we actually enter the world richer and much more expanded as a result of going through this experience, even though it is very difficult and painful, especially in the beginning. So okay, let's jump into the topic. So what is post-traumatic stress disorder? I wrote here a definition from the Mayo Clinic, and I want to read it to you. What they say is that it's a mental health condition that is triggered by a terrifying event, either experiencing it or witnessing it. So oftentimes, I actually just spoke to a client where she's a mother, of someone who is going through this right now. So, and she also has been affected. Symptoms may include flashbacks, very common after coming out of an abusive relationship. Nightmares, also very common. Gosh, the nightmares I had, oh my gosh. And severe anxiety, as well as uncontrollable thoughts about the event. I would also add to this depression, because from my own experience, I find that anxiety and depression tend to go hand in hand. It's almost as if the anxiety burns us out, and then we sort of plunge into the depressive state, exhausted from the overactivity and overstimulation. And also it can be very hard to adjust for some time after that. It can take some time to recover. So exposure to a roller coaster, an emotional roller coaster in a relationship can absolutely do that. Or going through a particularly intense traumatic event. Usually it's both. If you've been in one of those relationships, if you've come from a family like that, it tends to be both. It just fluctuates, right? There are times where it's just kind of this simmering feeling like something's wrong. Things are just not okay. And you're always on alert. And then on the other hand, there can be a big explosion, right? So in my case, I have particularly two experiences that stand out. One was a long relationship that had a lot of this simmering, although it had some intensely traumatic moments in it too. But I was told that, you know, as it usually is the case, that there was something wrong with me. I wasn't open-minded enough, you know, and so on and so forth. But there was this sort of this constant feeling of just things being off. And I felt like I wasn't quite in the world. It's a big one, you know, like I wasn't quite in reality. I was in another world, like an alternate world. And part of me was actually kind of proud of it. I liked it, which was part of the reason why it was difficult for me to leave, because I thought it was special. But on the other hand, it kept me disconnected and isolated from reality and from other people, which was the goal, right, of my partner. And then in the second case, it was less so of this, although that was present too from the start. And it was funny because I kept getting flashbacks of the earlier relationship, like this person and the events reminded me of it. And then there was a huge explosive event where everything just came to this climactic moment. And that was terrifying, absolutely terrifying. And it took me about 2 months, maybe even a little longer, of being in almost like a catatonic state where I just couldn't process it. It was too much. It just didn't add up. Like my thoughts were raging, and reality and just the regular world seemed like a fantasy. You know, it seemed like something that I couldn't quite reach and access. I also had no interest in it. But whenever I went inside myself and tried to sort things out and find a semblance of truth and sanity, I couldn't do that either, because it was just so much cognitive dissonance. There's just like walking on landmines. So if you're going through this right now, I have so much empathy for you, because I've really been there, and it's really, really hard. So what are some of the symptoms of depression? Because you're definitely sliding into a depressed state. But I think, again, that it sort of oscillates with anxiety, high pitch anxiety, panic level, right? So depression is we feel helpless and hopeless, like the idea of a future with anyone, right, or even on your own is just highly diminished. You don't feel like you're ever going to come out of it. There is a loss of sense of self, like you don't know who you are anymore. Very common. You're disinterested in everything, and everything feels like too much work. Like you'd rather not do it, because by the time you even start, you're like, you don't want to do it, right? There are sleep changes and dietary changes. You know, for me, my sleep was very dysregulated, because I would sleep like 6 hours at a time, then I would be awake, and then I would sleep again. It was like a baby, right? Waking up in the middle of the night, sleeping during the day, very difficult. I was really lucky because I didn't have to work during that time. I had actually planned to take a year off from work and travel and work on my book just before I met this last person that gave me this explosive experience. So I had some time and I didn't have to work. But this video, I think, is especially for those people who have a job, have children, have responsibilities, because dealing with all this, I can only imagine how difficult it must be. So there are emotional changes. We tend to be irritable, very sensitive to everything. Anything can trigger a flashback, right? In my case, I would look at a mountain or at a tree, because I spent a lot of time in nature with my last abuser. And so, and I actually created this really deep bond based on nature with him. So that used to be the sort of the source of enchantment and beauty and this longing and this, you know, this vision of our future. And now it just kept reminding me of what I had lost. So it gave me a lot of flashbacks. And also just tremendous loss of energy. Like I was saying earlier, like nothing felt attainable, right? And I'm typically an ambitious person. I work on my energy. I cultivate it. Like these days, completely different. And I'm back to what I used to be and then some. You know, I have additional tools because of having gone through this experience. But during that time, no, I was in my pajamas. It took a lot to you know, take a bath. It took a lot to change, you know, it took a lot to do anything, go on a walk. So I would start with minimum. Taking a shower was an accomplishment. Reading a couple of pages of a book was an accomplishment, although I must tell you that reading Psychopath Free, that was easy. I was plowing through that book because it was like somebody was really understanding and listening to me. It's a great book. I mention it a lot in my videos. So now let's look at the other side, right? The sort of the other polarity, the polarity of depression, the anxiety. It's very nervous, restless, tense energy. Brings our heart up. Right, so from being first very sort of, actually in yoga, there is this interesting system called the Rajas, Tamas, and Sattva, which is very much applicable here. So Sattva is the energy in the middle. It's the balanced energy. It's where we want to get to, where things just work out, when we're in the flow. Rajas is like anxiety. It's intense. It's like it's too much. It's too much. We self-generate a lot of our own tension. That way, it's the mind really doing that. But a lot of it is also physical. It's entrainment into the abuse cycles that can bring that on. And then there is tamas, which is this kind of sluggish, depressed state. So we're kind of oscillating here between the two, the rajas and the tamas. So heart rate is up. There's actually something I received a message from one of my viewers I want to mention here. Her name is Linda. So Linda, if you're watching, thank you for this. What she said is that she's been doing heart rate tests on herself. And what she did is first she measured what is her resting heart rate. And she noticed that every time she would think about her ex, her heart rate would go up immediately, right? Immediately after. So you may want to try that because you'll see that it has you get an immediate physical feedback. One of the tests that I have done later on in just kind of gauging how much I have processed this relationship that I was in, the explosive one, was that I received an email from one of his associates about a year after, maybe a little bit more, about a year and a couple months. And I didn't even flinch. I had no reaction whatsoever. There was no heart rate going up. So I knew at that point that I have exited that realm completely, and it had no more effect on me. So that's a moment of victory, and I wish that for all of you. What else? We breathe rapidly, right? We sweat. It's like panic coming on, tremble often, feeling weak and tired because like all the resources are being burned up towards something that we have no control over. It becomes very hard to concentrate. Your mind skips from place to place. It's a lot of very fragmented thoughts. We can also have social anxiety. That comes with it too. I see that very often in the work with my clients. That usually comes as a loss of trust in others and also self. They come hand in hand because you've been so repetitively hurt. Oftentimes it starts early on. You know, you get used to it without even knowing about it. It's an unconscious thing. It's like almost like a habit, bad habit we become, getting abused, you know, since we're kids, not having the tools to stand up for yourself, not lacking the assertiveness, something we're going to do in the workshop, by the way, learn assertiveness. So you're getting used to that. So eventually it just builds to that moment of this culmination where eventually things get so intense that we snap and we hit rock bottom, which is sort of the worst moment of your life. It feels like it, but it's also the best moment of your life because that is the chance for you to push yourself off the bottom and begin to swim towards light without counting on anyone's help, because oftentimes, you know, when we're moving through life in a compromised state, we are dependent in an unhealthy way. There's also healthy dependency in relationships. Well, I'm going to talk about more in my future videos, because I want to also start opening up the topics of creating healthy relationships and bridging the gap between unhealthy and healthy. So there's healthy dependency, right? But the unhealthy dependency is that we are looking for people to help us with emotional stability, which, if we have good allies around us, that's great. But the best allies are the ones who are going to teach us how to do this. It's like Jesus, right? Teaching how to fish rather than giving you the fish. So they need to teach you. If they're just giving you validation, which too is important, but without teaching you how to self-generate it, then you can grow an unhealthy dependency. And lo and behold, if you meet a narcissist on your path and you have that, then they can take a full advantage of you and just destroy you, right? Which, again, blessing in disguise. You hit rock bottom, and that's when you finally take a look at your inner architecture and see, okay, this is me. This is where I'm lacking tools, and you begin to rebuild yourself. That's what this process is about. So social anxiety often comes as a result of, you just don't trust anybody at this point because you've been hurt so many times. You don't want to take the risk again, so you isolate yourself. So some anxiety, some stress is normal. It's okay. Like, if you just have it every so often, don't worry about it. Some stress is also important because we need adrenaline, we need cortisol to just do things, right? I have days sometimes, I've had days when I get so relaxed. It usually happens after I take a break, I take a holiday, a couple of days off, when it can be difficult for me to kind of jumpstart myself again and get active. And that's when usually, the emails start piling up, tasks start piling up to the point where I get a stress response in my body and I go, okay, I gotta get things done. And it works like drinking a shot of espresso, right? And you start working. So the cycle between cortisol and relaxation, that's normal. That's part of being alive. But when it gets out of hand, when it becomes chronic, that's when we have a problem, especially when it interferes with your daily life. It can be very debilitating. So now that brings me to the core of this video, and what I wanted to talk about is drugs. Should you take antidepressants or an anti-anxiety medication? Usually they're paired up. They take care of both, or not. So of course it's your decision. You do what you need to do. But when I think of when I look at myself and what I've been through, and if I were to also have to raise a child during that time and take care of more things that I needed to, I know I would have had a much harder time than I actually did, because I did have the space and the time to really dive into this process, which is why I decided to start this channel and give you the tools that I have been able to learn and show you that they really work. Myself being probably like the biggest example of the fact that it does work. This work really gives you tremendous benefits if you stick with it. Because I was a zombie when I started, which you probably can see in my earlier videos. So the drugs can lower symptoms. They can make you calmer and not feel that physical contraction. Like for me, because I did take medication for a period of time, for me that contraction that's in the pit of my stomach was the most distracting and sort of soul-sucking, energy-sucking sensation that I had in my body, because I would start to work on something, or I would wake up full of life, and then that feeling would come on seemingly out of nowhere. It almost feels like out of nowhere. I think that it's like the body has, our body has these neural pathways that it develops, because I've felt it so often in my life that even if there was no reason for it to come on, it comes on because it's almost like the body's used to it. It's like an echo from the past. So it can be very debilitating. And so that's what it took care of me. Now, I get mixed reviews in the research that I've done. Some people say, don't do it. It's going to mess up with your brain. You're never going to be the same again. And some people say, actually, it was really helpful. And I'll tell you that in my case, it was really helpful. Why it was helpful? Well, I took it during a time in my life where I had already gone through the first sort of wave of recovery. And so I was in a more or less stable position, but then there were several events. It was like a confluence of events when a lot of things happened at once, where I just felt myself paralyzed in fear and there was a lot of anger, there's a lot of heat. It manifested as heat. I felt like I was being eaten alive from the inside. And I have done everything I was able to do at this time with respect to the supplements I was taking. I actually made a video about this. I'll link it down below here too. I'm going to write that down. Supplement video link. So I knew that I did everything I could from a natural standpoint, and then I went to see a neurologist because I was getting really debilitating headaches, and I felt like that was sort of the last symptom that hit me after this fever that was sort of digesting me from within. So I went to see a neurologist, and he said, do you want something or not? And I said, I'll try it. And so he prescribed for me something that was very light. He said, this is the lightest thing. It is very gentle. It's non-addicting. And he gave me a dosage of 20 pills. So 3 weeks, just almost 3 weeks. And I must tell you that from the moment I took it, feeling that relief in the body was tremendous. And I was looking out for red flags, so to speak, right? The alarms, like, am I going to feel completely disinterested? Am I going to feel maybe increase in appetite? That's what a lot of people experience, right? Am I going to feel anything that's going to make me feel like this was the wrong decision? And I'll tell you that I actually took it for 18 days. I didn't take the last 2 pills, and I did not have, I didn't find anything that I would say was, would have made me regret it. Would have made me regret having done this decision. Instead, I have settled into kind of a calmer space. It was nice that I didn't have that anxiety in my stomach, that tug, and also my thoughts slowed down. They weren't racing like they were before, when I was just like, what's going on with me? Something's wrong with me. I did the inner dialogue, which I have learned to already deconstruct, but it was still as if it was slipping out of my grasp, as if the skills that I have grown weren't just quite enough to have enough of the effect so that I can have the balance and tranquility in my life to do the work that I needed to do at the time, because I was working a lot of projects during that time. So I must say I was actually really happy with the effects. And here's another thing that it did for me, is it gave me this feeling of, oh, I now know what it's like to feel calm. So I was able to recreate that without the drug. So I was really happy with the experience. Now, some people will say that they're afraid that they're lazy. They're not going to do the inner work that they need to. And I didn't experience that. For me, I actually did more work. I had more energy to approach my self-development because I was calmer inside. I don't know. I wrote down here that maybe unless you take a drug that makes you highly dissociated, tired, or checked out, maybe this happens too. I know that the dosage and the type of the drug you take is very important. I think I got really lucky. Maybe also you may just need some extra rest. Maybe that's why you'll get dissociated. Maybe that's why you'll get lazy. Sometimes we're just exhausted and we need to have more rest. So listen to your body. And of course, there's still much more work that you'll need to do. And some of the work includes emotional release, very important to access full range of emotions in this PTSD work, educating yourself, externalization, getting your thoughts out, working on the inner critic so you can have a healthier inner dialogue, reparenting your inner child, right? Listening to and acting on your inner whisperings from the inner parent that come as a result of the inner child work, getting into alignment with your values so that you can taste the integrity that comes as a result and build momentum from that, finding your connection with the true inner source, with your authenticity, and with the greater source of all, said spiritual work, mindfulness, distancing yourself from the mental fluctuations, right, that are so distracting, and instead focusing on the now, forming new healthy habits. It's an ongoing work, being kind to yourself and working on your self-worth. So I just listed a few things here, and I know it can seem like a lot, which is why I created my Unchained course that is also available on my website right now. It's a 12-week journey with specific modules for recovery to help you actually find your way out. So depression, I think it comes from putting too much pressure on yourself. It's an internalized form of abuse that typically happens early on. And so we end up repressing our emotions by not understanding what they are. Comes from a lot of shame from the outside. We feel like we shouldn't feel something, so we repress it, and eventually it's so much, it piles up that we get depressed. That's just what I think from my own experience, what were the sources of my own depression. So an emotional processing can get very intense if you're going through this work. So sometimes giving yourself the little out, a little help in the form of a drug, a medication, could actually be very helpful. It can save you some energy. It can give you some energy. So of course it's up to you. I just wanted to really share my experience with this because there's so much information out there. I am not against it. I think there's great promise in this. Again, you need to be careful what you take. If you can do some additional tests to find something that really works for you, or if you try something and it doesn't work for you, go to a doctor, have them prescribe something else. Or maybe you feel like you really don't need it, like it's just not for you. You don't want to chemically alter your body. You just want to do it naturally. Then all the power to you. Go for it and do it. There's also a lot of talk of therapy using hallucinogens, as is a topic for another video. There's some promising results for people with PTSD. Maybe I'll talk about it in another future video. So for now, I'm going to say my goodbyes. I hope this was helpful to you. Again, I invite you to your comments, questions. Thank you for all your letters. If you haven't heard back from me yet, it's because I get so many and it can be hard to catch up sometimes. But know that I read them, I appreciate them, and I'm sending you guys so much love. And I hope to see you in New York or in San Francisco this summer. All the best to you. Bye-bye.
Dobrze.